Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays for Genshin. The next episode was technically supposed to be on Aloy, but I think I might need a bit more time making hers because 1, I don't even know what the hell she does, and 2, there's like no footage of her. So if any of my viewers happen to unironically play Aloy, please ping me in my Discord server, link is down below. I kinda need a bit of help in getting some footage. To make up for it though, here's an episode on everyone's favorite little terrorist, Klee. As usual, I need to make a disclaimer in case the Klee mains find out where I live. This video is not a personal attack, nor is it meant to slander or deride the character or anyone who plays her. The goal of Why No One Plays is to discuss characters who aren't used very much or sought after, analyzing why they're unpopular, and to possibly figure out ways we can improve their gameplay, beyond simply making them stronger in damage or numbers. To me, Klee is a shining example of a character that could have been extremely good if things were just slightly better. She's a Pyro Catalyst user, and while there aren't that many characters who can wield catalysts, one thing going for them is their passive elemental damage, in that all of their attacks automatically do elemental damage without the need for internal or external sources to imbue them. Theoretically, that sounds amazing to have on a damage dealer, compounded by the fact that she's on the strongest offensive element in the game. Funnily enough, the one department that Pyro was weak in, at least until Yoimiya came out, was range. Almost every decent Pyro character was locked to melee, Bennett, Hu Tao, Xiangling, Diluc, and so on, so Klee had the potential to really stand out as a range damage dealer. But it soon became evident that she was a range character in name only, which sucks. In a similar fashion to Aether and Lumine, a lot is said about Klee's destructive power. She burns down an entire forest, she's the daughter of Alice, supposedly one of the most powerful mages in the world. She's the famous Spark Knight, like a lot of descriptions about how her small appearance belies the fact that she can blow up a continent. And yet, that doesn't really translate too well in-game. So let's break down what's wrong with her, starting with, in my opinion, the biggest issue being her bad user experience. Klee is the usability nightmare, and arguably the worst in the entire game. That seems to be a running trend with a lot of unpopular characters. There are so many factors preventing you from being able to comfortably play her that to many, it begs the question, why even bother? To elaborate, let's first go through the biggest problem with her kit, her auto attacks. Catalyst users have an interesting way of dealing damage compared to physical weapons. Rather than the weapons carrying the hitbox or the arrows being the source of damage, catalysts inflict elemental damage by default, appearing at the location of whoever's in range in the form of bursts of elements. This applies to Mona, Sucrose, Kokomi, Barbara, and Lisa. There's another group of catalyst users that fire long-range auto-homing projectiles as if they were using a bow. That would be Yanfei and Ningguang, launching fireballs and geocrystals respectively. And then there's Klee. Despite being a catalyst user herself, she doesn't actually use it in the conventional sense. Everyone knows she likes to create bombs, and obviously what do you do with them? You throw them. Realistically, her stubby little hands can only throw so many at a time. As a result, Klee has, in my knowledge, the slowest attack speed out of any DPS character, being able to attack only 3 times per rotation with long animations. Yes, I know Ningguang only attacks once, but she has 2 projectiles per hit and she can cancel them really easily. There is a way to circumvent this by animation canceling, where you buffer a jump or sprint right after the attack comes out, but ideally you don't want to use sprint because that stamina can burn through very quickly, and Genshin's jump animations aren't too easy to control. If you think of Minecraft, it's really easy to jump and hop around while attacking enemies with either a sword or a bow. Very fluid and natural, one doesn't detract from the other. Then there's games like Fortnite, which are predicated on keeping yourself moving at all times, jumping around while shooting and building so as to avoid taking enemy fire. The physics engines in each of these games were designed with the intent that players are going to be inputting action commands as they jump and move around, and so they wanted to make it as seamless as possible. Genshin's combat system does not allow for simultaneous input. You can't jump and attack at the same time. You can't sprint and attack at the same time. In other words, Klee has clunky moves that need to be animation cancelled to be good, but jump animations are clunky themselves and the timing is rather strict. I'm not sure how much better it is on other catalyst users, but it feels like Klee's auto attacks miss a lot more since they're not homing projectiles or explosions. One might think maybe her charged attack is where the money's at. Not quite. Her charged attack targets a small area in front of her for a big chunk of pyro damage. Because it has an explosion property, it knocks back smaller enemies, requiring her to waste stamina to chase after her targets. Being a small body type also means she has the shortest immediate dash range, so you burn much more stamina than if you were playing, say, Ningguang, who's a tall body type. This matters because catalyst users have the highest stamina cost on charged attacks out of any weapon type, 50. Even with max stamina, you can only get about 3 to 4 hits out before you have to recharge. For Klee, this number goes down to 2 since you can't auto-cancel her charge attack like you can her normal ones. There's also a massive issue of range. Klee's charge attack can do a lot of damage, but it can only hit directly in front of her, like point blank. It looks shorter than certain melee charge attacks. It would be one thing if she can artillery fire someone from 10 meters away, but the range is so bad she has to be right in front of someone to damage them. Catalyst users also have the lowest health and defense out of any class, so she's effectively a glass cannon, a very inconsistent one at that. In light of their high stamina cost and lack of free aim the way bow users can, Catalyst users are the worst weapon type to have as a main DPS, and even among them, Klee's rather hard to use not because her damage is low, rather how that damage is applied. A major component that limits her effectiveness is that her damage is spread across dozens of smaller hits as opposed to a single giant nuke. Sound familiar? That's because Keqing and Amber suffer from this very issue as well. Klee's elemental skill tosses a bouncing bomb that deals damage on each bounce before exploding on the third one, splitting into several mines, which can explode upon contact with enemies or after a period of time. Now, to her credit, she can store 2 charges of Jumpty Dumpty, and if a singular enemy were to detonate the entire cluster of mines, we're talking a lot of damage. But Klee applies pyro too fast and too often to where it's hard for her to consistently chain vaporize or melt for maximum damage. Sparks and Splash is a buff that allows her basic attacks to deal subsequent AoE pyro damage with each attack, increasing her overall effective DPS. But that also means she doesn't have an effective burst option the way other top DPSers do. And that's really unfortunate since Mona's synergy with pyro characters can straight up one-shot bosses. I'm not saying this makes Klee unviable, but as mentioned in previous videos, elemental reactions in their current state favor a single powerful strike over death by 1,000 cuts. In order to optimize Klee's damage, there needs to be a support unit who can apply Hydro or Cryo as fast as she applies Pyro, and at the moment that's impossible. Xingqiu comes the closest, but even then, he can only chain Vaporize on like 2 out of every 3 of her attacks. On another note, usually to compensate for the lack of range, melee attackers have much better area coverage and the natural property of being able to hit all enemies that are within range of their attacks. Conversely, bow users can only strike one person at a time with their aim shot in exchange for being able to attack from a far distance, and that's also why Ganyu is top tier because she has amazing AoE damage while being ranged. By that logic, you would think that Klee's poor range would allow her more area coverage to compensate. On paper it does, but in practice not so much. Just by looking at her charge attack is a small circle in a very specific area in front of her. Jumpty Dumpty's bouncing hits, the mines, and Sparks and Splash do area damage as well. In fact, Klee's entire kit does AoE pyro damage. It was so funny watching her character spotlight video because the narrator was saying AoE pyro damage every 2 seconds. It became a meme.
AoE pyro damage, AoE pyro damage, AoE pyro damage, AoE pyro damage, AoE pyro damage.
Yet despite having the potential to hit multiple targets with each attack, their effect radius is too small to be reliable. The only way you can easily hit large groups of enemies is by corralling them with Kazuha or Venti. Once again, it's better to have one giant attack than a bunch of small attacks, both in damage and area coverage. Aside from high damage, what do Hu Tao, Xiangling, Bennett, and Diluc have in common? Insane area of effect, especially with their elemental burst. Hu Tao's Spirit Soother covers 360 degrees around her. Diluc is the king of AoE damage. He essentially conjures a tsunami of fire. Xiangling's got her Pyronado, a spinning Beyblade that orbits you for quite a long time, and even though people don't necessarily use it for the damage, Bennett's Passion Overload is also a massive nuke in a large area around him. Contrasting their attacks with Klee's, you'd be hard-pressed to even call Sparks and Splash AoE damage. In her defense, if you manage to overcome all of these hurdles, Klee's damage is terrifying. She has virtually endless uptime unlike most pyro units and can dish out incredible damage in the right circumstances. It's just that the margin for error is far too high for not enough reward relative to the amount of work you have to put in. Incidentally, what really bothers me about Klee is that her kit forces her to be a main DPSer, but there are so many things about her that would make much more sense as a sub-DPS like Xingqiu or Shogun. Much like Kokomi, I feel like MiHoYo intended for Klee to be your primary attacker, but the way they designed her accidentally happens to make her a fantastic backup DPS in concept. Interestingly enough, she has energy battery capabilities thanks to her passive talent and Constellation 6. Normally, main DPS units only restore their own energy, but Klee's 2 abilities can charge her entire party. Her supportive capabilities stretch beyond that. Constellation 2 causes her mines to lower their target's defense by 23% for 10 seconds, entailing she has some viability as a breaker as you can swap to her, toss out her E, then swap right back. 10 seconds is a long time too, could be good for quick swaps. And speaking of quick swap, Sparks and Splash is a lot like Xingqiu's Rain Cutter where a cluster of pyro damage is inflicted on whoever Klee is attacking. We have yet to see a character that turns you into a one-man Vaporize, Melt, or Overload reactor, and that's the whole reason why Xingqiu is so strong, his ability to cause passive hydro application. The 2 ultimates are almost identical to each other, so I fail to understand why Klee's disappears when she switches out. Now she does have Constellation 4, which triggers a massive explosion if she switches out while her elemental burst is in effect. but I think a lot of players would much rather have the burst remain on the active party member. Moreover, Klee gives a 25-second 10% bonus pyro damage buff with her ultimate on C6. For Constellation 6, it may not be the greatest thing out there, but 25 seconds of bonus pyro damage is a very long time. And something else that's tied only to her, I believe, is that those Jumpty Dumpty mines can be moved around by Animo attacks. Jean, Kazuha, Sucrose, and Animo Traveler's elemental skills can force enemies to take damage from all 8 of those mines instead of having to wait for them to carelessly walk over them. There's a lot of possibilities for Klee to play as a sub-DPS unit if only they fully went in that direction, but let's assume at the current moment we're trying to make her feel better to use as a main DPS. What can we do? Catalyst users suffer the most from a lack of free targeting. Melee attacks don't need to be aimed since they just hit right in front of you and around you, but bows have aim shot to allow you to selectively choose who you want to attack from afar. Catalysts have auto-targeting. They're somewhat reliable, but it would be infinitely better to give Klee some semblance of targeting. For example, the longer she holds the left click, the farther her charge attack will go. She's a ranged attacker with a charged attack that has less range than even some melee attackers. Speeding up her attack animations to weave together would do wonders for her too. Jumpty Dumpty has a long cast time and can't be animation cancelled alongside her charged attack. Actually, just remove knockback on every character, period. There's almost never a situation in which you would want to push enemies away from you since the goal is to kill them. Things like Diluc's Burst is fair since the Phoenix inflicts persistent damage as it travels, but at the end of the day, the goal is to keep enemies within striking distance. It's why Animo characters like Venti, Kazuha, and Sucrose are so good to use because they can force a lot of opponents into a small area to one-shot all of them. That said, I don't think it would be wise to change any of her ability's fundamental attributes though. We don't want all characters to have the same elemental burst or skills. Klee's rapid application of Pyro hinders her right now, but if we ever get new characters that can match her frequency of attacks, that would solve the issue outright. All in all, Klee is a character with a lot of missed potential. She has an elemental skill and burst that would be amazing for a sub-DPSer, but she's a main DPS. She's got a ton of damage output, but it's in the form of 1,000 small hits instead of one big one. She's a ranged user with very poor range. Being a catalyst user, she has low durability, and her attacks, while powerful, are super clunky. There's one other thing that has me concerned. We already know Alice will be a playable unit in the near future, otherwise they wouldn't have spent so much time building her up to be this legendary explorer mage, what with Albedo saying she's stupid busted and her reputation spanning far and wide. If she's anything like her daughter, that means Alice will possibly be a far superior version to Klee. Both are mages, both love to blow things up, and both are kind of batshit crazy. Then again, I don't think she'll be coming anytime soon, so we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now, something I thought about after having made a few Why No One Plays episodes is whether or not every unit should be changed to be good at all. When I talked about Zhongli, I mentioned how MiHoYo overbuffed the character and they likely won't and shouldn't backpedal on those buffs because that would disillusion a lot of players into thinking they were baited to pull on the rerun. But that brings up a point for debate. Should we even bother making Klee or Keqing or Kokomi better? Remember how everyone was clamoring for Shogun to get buffs because everyone thought she was bad, although now we realize that she's actually really broken, right? To some extent, it would be nice for every 5-star character to be viable so players have more creative agency in designing parties and playing whoever they like. But no matter how narrow that gap is, there will always be characters that are better than others no matter what. And despite all I've said about Klee, she's not bad. Yes, we have Hu Tao, who is invariably the strongest Pyro DPS unit in Genshin so far, but that doesn't translate to Diluc and Klee being bad. Objectively, they're very respectable 5-stars and can more than serve as your party's main. Much of what I've said in this video is related to why people don't like to play her as much as the others, which despite what some of you might think, isn't always an indicator of their power level. Anyways, that's all I have to say about our adorable arsonist. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on Klee. For the time being, if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Also check out my main channel if you play League of Legends by any chance. I do discussions over there as well. Apart from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server. We have a little Genshin community in there if you'd like to join. And be sure to watch my previous Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.